Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics, Dio here. Today we have a 2011 Hyundai Sonata with a 2.4 liter. The complaint on this car is that the engine does not crank when you turn the key to the start position. So it is a no crank, no start condition. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to confirm the customer's complaint. So I'm going to try to start it by turning the key to the start position. So right there, as you can see, the key is on, and I'm going to try to start it now. And as you can see, I'm turning the key to the start position. The engine doesn't start. And as I'm trying to start it, I hear a clicking noise coming from under the hood. Listen. So I hope you heard that clicking noise. And this noise is coming from under the hood, like I said. And this noise can either come from the starter itself or the starter relay. Okay, so one thing you also want to check if your engine doesn't crank while you turn the key to the start position is your battery. You want to make sure that your battery is charged. If you have a weak battery, your engine or your starter will just make a clicking sound, and it won't have or there won't be enough voltage to spin the starter fast enough to start the engine. So you can check that by turning on your headlights and trying to crank your engine with your headlights on. So if your headlights dim completely while you're cranking it, it means your battery is weak. Or you can just focus on the lights on the dash, okay? While you're cranking your engine, if the lights on the dash dim while you're turning the key to the start position, it means your battery is weak. So watch. Just focus on the lights on the dash. Now I'm going to crank it. And as you can see, while I'm cranking it, I can hear a clicking sound under the hood, but our lights on the dash did not dim, okay? So we most likely don't have a weak battery. Okay, so we're going to get the battery option or the battery out of the way, because I don't think we have a weak battery, because that's one option. That's one thing that can cause a no crank, no start condition. So I don't think we have a weak battery. So now I'm going to connect the scan tool to the car. I'll get the scan tool connected and then bring you guys back up. Alright, so I got the scan tool connected to the vehicle. So now we're going to scan it to see if there are any trouble codes in memory that will give us any directions on how to fix this car. So let's auto ID the vehicle. And right there, the scan tool has identified the car. So let's click OK. So let's go to engine. Let's go to codes. So right there, as you can see, we don't have any trouble codes in memory. So the car doesn't crank, but there are no trouble codes. So now what do you do when you don't have any trouble codes in memory? So there are no trouble codes giving us any directions, but the engine doesn't crank. So now what do you do when you have an engine that doesn't crank and there are no trouble codes in memory? So now the next step is going to be looking at a starting system wiring diagram. So now I want to look at the wiring diagram so I can know how this starter system is wired, and then we will talk about how we can go to fix this. So let's back out of here and go to our service information. Let's go to share track and repair information. So this is a Sonata GLS. So let's go to wiring diagrams, system wiring diagrams. So we're gonna find the starting system wiring diagram. So here it is, starting and charging system. So let's click on that. Alright, so here is our starting circuit, and right here we have our ignition switch, and down over here is a partial view of our power distribution box, and here is the starter relay. Okay, so the starter relay has two wires on the control side of the relay. So this wire here, this black wire, it looks like a ground. Okay, there's a ground here. And then this other wire, so on this side, as you can see, there's a little, we have two wires here. Here it says AT, automatic transmission, and right here it says MT, manual transmission. So our vehicle has an automatic transmission. So we're gonna follow this wire just to find out, or so we can know how this relay works, because this relay has to, this coil here has to get energized to send power from this side of the circuit down to this leg of the circuit. Okay, so let's go down and follow this wire. So we're following this wire just to know how this starting circuit works. So down here, it looks like this wire goes down to, so it goes down here. It goes down to the transmission range switch. Okay. And then from the transmission range switch, the transmission range switch wires, these wires that say signal, go to the engine computer. As you can see right here, it says PCM. Okay. So basically the computer controls the starter relay, and those signals coming from the computer go through the transmission range switch, and then out of the transmission range switch they go through this wire out here. And then if you follow this wire, there's a switch here inside the transmission range switch, another switch in here that goes through this wire. It says without ignition lock switch, and then there's some type of relay here. So just right here, this is the automatic transmission. So we're staying on this side of the circuit, guys. So this wire, this side of the circuit is if we had a manual transmission. But since we have an automatic transmission, we're gonna focus on this wire. So it goes up here, and then all the way up to here. Okay, so basically, so there's a relay here that they call a burglar alarm relay. So when you turn your key, because this is the ignition switch, when you turn the key to the start position, there's power flowing down through this side of the circuit, through this fuse, and then it comes down through this relay. So this relay gets energized. There's another burglar alarm relay here that actually controls the control side of the relay. So power flows down through this wire while the relay is energized. So power flows down through this gray wire, and then it continues to flow down. Let's scroll down a little bit. So it continues to flow down through this wire here, and then as it gets to this transmission range relay, this switch closes if your gear shifter is in park or in neutral. So this here will be closed, allowing power to flow from this wire through this wire here, going up to the starter relay. Okay, so going up right here to the starter relay and all the way here. Since we have constant ground on this side of the relay, this coil is going to get energized. Once this coil gets energized, it closes this switch, which allows power to flow from this side of the circuit down here, because there's a fuse here, and this fuse has power with the key on or with the engine cranking. So power flows down through this wire, and as it flows down through this wire, so right here, you know, and assuming, I'm saying this assuming everything is working fine. So power flows down through this wire. So we're gonna follow this wire, and this wire goes down to the starter motor. So right over here. So if power is coming down through this wire, assuming that the starter case is grounded, so there's good ground at the starter, and there's power, there's 12 volts coming from the battery at the B positive terminal of the starter. If you send 12 volt on this wire, the starter should spin and crank the engine. Okay, so now what we could do is, I mean, depending on what you want to start with, you can start checking the starter relay first or that fuse, I don't know. But I like to go straight to the component first and then work my way up. So let's go to the starter and make sure that there's good ground at the starter and there's power at the B positive terminal of the starter, this wire right here. So we're gonna check ground at the starter, power at the B positive terminal. And once we crank the engine, so once we turn the key to the start position, we should have 12 volt on this wire, okay? I'm sorry for the glare. So we should have 12 volt on this green wire. So if there's power here on this wire coming from the battery, if there's good ground, if there's 12 volt here on the signal wire while we crank the engine, if everything here checks out okay, what do you think the issue is going to be? You got it, right? The issue will be the starter itself. So if we have power here, we have good ground on the starter, and we don't have 12 volt on this wire when we turn the key to the start position, and then we will work our way up to the relay and test the rest of the circuit. So this should be an easy one. So let's go under the hood and test the starter and the starting circuit. Alright guys, so we are here under the hood. We're going to test the starter. We're gonna start by testing the starter first. If everything at the starter tests okay, then we will work our way up to the engine computer. But I think our issue is just the starter motor. I think the starter motor is defective. So since I'm here by myself, I don't have any assistant today, I'm going to use this tool to allow me to energize the starting system, or this will actually replace the relay. I'm gonna do this to test my signal circuit, okay? Because if I had someone here, someone would have been inside the car on the driver's seat and turned the key to test the circuit, the signal circuit. But since I don't have anybody here, I'm going to use this tool here that actually bypasses the relay to test the signal circuit for the starter motor, okay? So now what I need to do is I'm going to find where the starter relay lives inside the power distribution box. I'm gonna remove the starter relay and I will install this U-Activate tool where the starter relay lives. Actually, this is a really good tool to have, especially if you're working by yourself. So let's remove this fuse box cover. This is hard to do one-handed. So I'm gonna remove this fuse box cover, and inside the cover it should tell us the location of the fuses and the relays. Alright, so here is the inside of the fuse box cover, and the starter relay looks like it lives over here. As you can see, it says start 1, so that's the starter relay right over there. So it looks like, if we look at the cover from this angle, so the starter relay is this relay right over here. So we're gonna remove this relay, and again, I'm doing this because I'm here by myself, so I'm gonna have to use the U-Activate tool to test the circuit, basically from the relay down to the starter, okay? So here comes our starter relay, and this is the relay that was clicking when we were turning the key to the start position. So I'm gonna put it right over here, and we're going to, you have to make sure that the adapter you're using for the tool is identical with the relay. So we're gonna put it right over here. Alright, so the tool is connected to the circuit. So now if I flip this switch to the on position, if everything was fine, this starter should crank right now. And as you can see, it's not cranking. So right now what I need to do is I'm gonna try to find a way. Let me see if I can push that tool down here. Or maybe I can just put it over here, because I'm gonna lift the car. I'm gonna lift up the car. So now let's lift up the car so we can get underneath the vehicle and do our test, the starter motor. Alright guys, so we are under the vehicle right now, and the starter motor lives somewhere over there. So that's the starter. So we're gonna have to get access to those wires so we can do our tests. So it looks like I'm gonna have to remove this oil filter housing. I have to get it out of the way so that we can get access to the starter motor. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have to undo this bolt here. There are 4 of them. There's 2 on this side, so there's this one and that one, and there are 2 more on this side. So there's this one and there's another one up there. So once I remove those bolts, and I'm gonna undo the bolt for this bracket, because this is the oil supply. One of this is the oil supply hose to the filter, and then the other one is the return. So I'm gonna undo this bracket here, and then I'll just push this whole oil filter housing out of the way. So we're just gonna hang it around here so we can get access to the starter and do our test. So I'll get this out of the way and bring you guys back up. Alright, so before we go back under the vehicle and see the starter, because I did remove the oil filter housing out of the way, so we have enough room under the vehicle now so we can get access to the starter motor. So I'm gonna connect these test leads here to the battery positive and battery negative. So I'm connecting this so we can do a voltage drop test. So this is gonna go to battery positive because we're gonna be under the vehicle and I don't wanna come back up here. So this red lead is actually going to battery positive. So we're just gonna feed it through all the way down here. And then the negative test lead is gonna go to battery negative. So this guy is gonna go right over here. Okay, so and we're also gonna feed this one through. Alright, so now we have one test lead going to battery ground, so the black test lead, and then the other test lead going to battery positive, the red test lead. So now let's lift the vehicle and go back under the vehicle so we can do our test. Alright, so the vehicle is all the way up in the air, so now we are ready to test our starter motor. So we are using this U-Activate tool to bypass the starter relay. So once I flip this switch to the on position, there should be power flowing down to the signal circuit of the starter. Okay, so this here will command the starter to spin. So I'll be flipping this once we test the control circuit of the starter. Okay, so that gray wire we saw on the wiring diagram. So once I flip this switch, there should be power flowing from up the fuse box down to the wire here at the starter motor so that the starter can spin. So this will allow us to test the signal circuit of the starter. Okay, so now let's go to the starter and check our powers and grounds, and then we're going to do a voltage drop test on the ground side of the starter and the power side of the starter. So now let's go to our starter and do the test. Alright guys, so we're back here under the vehicle, and as you can see we have enough room to access the starter motor. So I had to remove the oil filter housing so that we can get enough room to access the starter motor. So I just pushed it over here to the side. So here is the oil filter housing. So these test leads are the test leads that I just showed you earlier. These test leads are coming from the battery. The red test lead is connected to battery positive, and then the black test lead is connected to battery negative. So what we're going to do now is we have to make sure that there's power and ground at the starter. The stud you see up there, this stud is the B positive terminal of the starter, and that terminal should have power all the time. So we're going to use a test light to test the B positive terminal. So I'm going to connect my test light to ground. I'm just going to connect it on this bolt here. So here's my test light. Let's make sure it's connected. So once I touch that stud over there, the B positive terminal, the test light should light. And as you can see, the test light is lit, okay? And knowing how bright it is, just looking at how bright this test light lights, I mean, it's pretty bright. So I don't think we have a voltage drop problem, but you have to do a voltage drop test with the circuit being loaded. So right now the circuit is not loaded, so we can't make a definitive call, or we can't say that this circuit is good. So we know that there's ground at the starter body because the starter is mounted on the block, and there's power at the B positive terminal. So there's power and ground at the starter. So now the next test we're going to do is we're going to do a voltage drop test on the ground side of the starter and the positive side of the starter. So I will get a multimeter so we can do our voltage drop test. Alright guys, so here's the multimeter. I have my multimeter set up on the voltage scale. We're going to do our voltage drop test. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to connect our multimeter between negative and negative. So on the negative terminal of the battery and then the starter case to do our negative side voltage drop test. Okay, so this terminal here, this black test lead, so this black test lead is connected to battery negative, and then this other black test lead, so I have an alligator clamp connected to it. So we're just gonna clamp it on the starter body. So we're gonna clamp it on that bolt. And as you can see, we are reading 0, 0. So you have to do your voltage drop test with the circuit loaded. So right now the circuit is not loaded. We have to crank the engine or crank the starter. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this tool here that I have. Okay, that tool there. So I'm gonna flip the switch to the on position so that we can see if we will have any numbers here on the screen. So basically the rule of thumb, or the acceptable number when you're doing a voltage drop on the negative side is 100 millivolts. Anything above 100 millivolts is not good. Okay, so I'm gonna flip the switch and let's look at the screen and see what kind of number we're gonna see. So I'm flipping the switch so that we can load the circuit. Alright, so I'm gonna flip the switch. So right there, we went up to 0.01. Okay, so the switch is off. I'm gonna flip the switch again. So right there, we went to 0.01 volts. So 100 millivolts, okay? So that's good right there. So our negative side of the starter doesn't have excessive voltage drop, okay? So now I'm gonna remove this. Now we're gonna test the positive side of the starter. Okay. So let's get that. We're gonna disconnect this. And then we're gonna connect our red test lead now. Okay. All right, so I hope you can see the voltmeter there. So basically we're doing the same thing. So now red to red. So basically battery positive to positive B terminal, or B terminal on the starter. Okay, so positive to positive. So this one is gonna go here. Okay, so this test lead here is connected to the positive terminal on the battery, and this other test lead with the red alligator clip, I'm going to connect it to the B positive terminal on the starter. So right there, I got it connected to the starter. As you can see, we're reading 0, 0. So just to make sure that, just to double check and make sure that I have good connection, I'm gonna try to touch the starter body to see. If I touch the starter body, since one side is connected to battery positive, we should read system voltage there. So right there, as you can see, we're reading 0.9 volts. I mean, the battery is starting to get weak because the key has been on for a little while now. So now, and this is not going to prevent us from doing our test. So right there, so positive to positive, I have my test lead to the B positive terminal of the starter. So now I'm going to flip the switch one more time to load the circuit. So right there, I'm going to flip the switch now. I hope you heard that. So we're still reading 0.00. Okay, I'm loading the circuit again. Okay, so 0, 0. So this tells me that we don't have voltage drop on the ground side and the positive side of the starter. Okay, so we are not dealing with a voltage drop problem. So now let's get our multimeter out of here. We have one last wire to test before we call for a new starter. Okay, so now the last thing to test is the signal wire, okay? The wire that comes from the starter relay, and it's this wire up here. You probably won't be able to see it, but I'm gonna disconnect it first. So right here, so this wire is what we're gonna test. This is a signal wire. So when you turn the key to the start position, this wire should carry 12 volts to energize the starter solenoid and then spin the starter. So this is what causes the starter to spin, okay? So we checked ground and power at the starter. We know there's power and ground at the starter, so that's good. So now we're gonna test this. And this wire should have power when you turn the key to the start position, because this is the wire coming from the starter relay. If there's power here once we turn the key to the start position, what do you think the problem is gonna be? Well, it's that simple, right? The problem will be the starter motor itself, okay? So now I'm gonna use a test light to test this wire. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. I don't know how this is gonna go, but all right, so now we're gonna test the last wire, which is the control wire that energizes the starter relay, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip the switch on the tool. So we're gonna flip the switch to the on position. Once we flip it, there should be power on this wire, okay? And we're gonna test this wire using this test light. The test light is connected to ground, so on this bolt over here. And I'm using this test lead to connect the wire, the signal wire, with the test light. Okay. So I hope I can get this thing to stay. So right there, okay, so test light, one side of the test light connected to ground, and then the other side of the test light connected to the signal wire of the starter. So now I'm gonna flip the switch. So once I flip the switch, the test light should light. And if the test light lights, we will know that the issue is the starter. So watch, I think I saw the test light light, so watch. So right there, test light is lit. I'm gonna flip the switch to the off position. So what I'm doing with the tool here, the tool is just bypassing the starter relay, that's all. So watch, I'm gonna flip it to the on position. So as you can see, the test light lights, flip it off. So we checked our power supply. So there's power at the starter, there's ground at the starter, so the issue is the starter, okay? So we have a defective starter, and there's power on the signal wire of the starter, okay? So we're gonna replace this starter, and once we get this starter replaced, this engine will crank and start again. So I'm gonna call the parts store and get the starter ordered. And once we get the starter, I'll bring you guys back up so we can replace the starter. And I'm sure once we get the starter, this vehicle will run again. So remember what we did. We made sure that there's power and ground at the starter. We did a voltage drop test. There was no excessive voltage drop on either side of the starter, you know, the positive side and the ground side. And we also tested the signal wire here, and there's power coming down the signal wire when we flip the switch to the on position on the tool, okay? So basically there's power coming down this wire when you turn the key to the start position. And with everything being good, the starter should crank, or this engine should crank. Since the engine doesn't crank, the issue is the starter. So I'll get the starter, and then I'll bring you guys back up once the new starter comes in so we can replace it. Alright guys, so our new starter just came in. Here is the starter for this 2011 Hyundai Sonata, and here is the part number. So let me show you the part number. So there is the part number right there. So we're gonna install this new starter, and I'm sure once we install this starter, this vehicle will start again and run. Okay, so here's the new starter that we got from the parts store. So I will go under the car and remove the old starter so we can replace it with this. So let's go under the car and get this starter replaced. Alright guys, so now we're gonna remove the starter. The starter has two bolts that hold it against the engine block. So there's this bolt here at the bottom, and then there's another one on the top. So I'm gonna turn you guys around here so I can show you the bolts that I'm talking about. So hope you can see. So this bolt right here is a starter bolt. This is one of them, and there's another one just above this bolt. So one here and another one up here. I won't be able to show it to you, but if you put your hand up here, you'll be able to feel it. So the other starter bolt is up here. So and then we're gonna also disconnect this B positive terminal wire. So I already cracked it, so I already undid this nut over here. So I'm gonna remove that. So let's get this nut removed so we can remove the power supply wire. Alright, so now I'm gonna remove this power supply wire of the starter. So here it is. Okay, so there is our starter. Okay, so right there, the starter is basically ready to come out. Okay, so after I remove these bolts on the other side of the starter, once we remove this other bolt, the starter should be able to come out. So I'm gonna remove, so it's basically this bolt over here. Okay, this one. There's one here and there's another one up there. So I'm gonna remove these two bolts so that we can get the starter out. Alright, so this bolt right here, I'm gonna remove this bolt and then we'll be able to take the starter out. Alright, so the starter is almost ready to come out. I did remove the bolt that was over here. So this was one of the bolts that holds the starter down. So there's this one and there's another one above it, just on the other side of this little hump here. Okay, so I did remove both starter bolts. So now the starter should be able to come out. So we're gonna move back here. And now we should be able to remove the starter. So everything is disconnected on the starter. So the starter should be able to come out. So here it comes. As you can see, here is our starter motor. Okay, so the starter is removed. Alright, so here is the starter. Okay. It looks dark here. So now let's install our new starter. Alright, so here is our new starter. As you can see, nice and shiny. So now we're gonna install this starter. So let's go up here. We're gonna install this guy. Alright, so there is the starter. So now I'm gonna put the bolts that hold the starter down. Alright, so I tightened the bolts that hold the starter down. So there's one over here and there's another one above it, okay? So now that we have tightened the starter bolts, so now let's reconnect the starter wires. Now I'm gonna reconnect this power supply wire of the starter. So that's gonna go on the terminal over there. So I'm gonna put the nut on. Alright, so I'm gonna tighten the nut. I'm gonna have to sit you guys down here so I can tighten the nut. Alright, so I tightened the nut of the B positive terminal of the starter. So now we're gonna connect our signal wire. So this is gonna go this way. Alright, so I got the signal wire of the starter reconnected. So now I'm going to reinstall the oil filter housing. And after reinstalling this oil filter housing, I'll bring you guys back up so we can start the engine. So this is pretty easy to install. It has 4 bolts. So these 4 bolts go over here. So once I tighten all these bolts, I will lower the vehicle so we can start it. So once everything is back up, this vehicle will start, okay? So I will reinstall this oil filter housing and bring you guys back up. All right, guys, so I got everything back together. And as you can see, the new starter is over there, nice and shiny, okay? So everything is back together. I reconnected all the wires. The oil filter housing has been reinstalled. So now I'm gonna lower the vehicle so we can start the engine. Alright, so I have lowered the vehicle. So now we're gonna install the starter relay so that we can start the car. So we're gonna take this tool out. So now I'm going to pull this out. Alright, so the tool is removed. Now we're gonna install the starter relay. So we're gonna push this in. Okay, we can put the fuse box cover back on. Okay, so we're gonna install this negative terminal on the battery. Let's get the tool out of the way. All right, so I'm gonna tighten down the negative terminal that I removed. Okay, since the battery is a little bit weak, I'm gonna have to put a charger on it so that we can get the vehicle started. Alright, so I got the charger hooked up to the battery, so now it is the moment of the truth. Let's go inside the car and crank it to see if the engine is gonna start. So now let's go inside the car. Alright guys, so we're back here inside the vehicle. Now we're ready to start the engine. We have diagnosed it and we confirmed that the starter was bad, so we replaced it. So now let's see if we made the right call. So now I'm gonna insert the key inside the ignition so we can start it. Alright, so I'm gonna insert the key. So I'm gonna turn the key on. So now let's crank it. Right there. I hope you can hear. It started. So as you can see, the engine is running. Right there. There are no lights on the dash. So I'm gonna turn the engine off. So I'm gonna start it one more time. As you can see, this is fixed, guys. The engine is running. So I'm gonna give it gas. So right there, the engine sounds good. There are no other lights on the dash, so this is fixed. So let's turn it off so we can wrap up this video. So this is how you diagnose and fix a no crank, no start condition on a 2011 Hyundai Sonata with a 2.4 liter. I hope you liked this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. So as you can hear, the engine is running.